Bryce Finley and I Kyleworth went to high school and college together and were fraternity brothers in college. I was always the most likely to succeed, while Bryce was the most likely to go to jail. One of the reasons I was chosen as most likely to succeed was because in both high school and college, I worked in business and actually hired my classmates. By the age of 28, Bryce had 2 failed businesses, was working on a third, and almost went to jail for income tax evasion, but luckily avoided it, so he didn't live up to his title of most likely to. I was grateful to live up to my title and become a successful entrepreneur and the top volunteer fundraiser for the Police Boys and Girls Club in our metropolitan area. I was in better physical shape than I'd ever been in high school or college, while Bryce, well, let's just say he wasn't. However, Bryce had one advantage over me. He was married to Gail Finlay, née Preston. Gail is a perfect example of how guys have different tastes in women. Gail is short, thin, with a cup breasts and medium hair. She has a pretty face, but other women with equally pretty faces don't excite me as much. She has exceptional eyes, and when she looks at you, you get the impression that she is looking into your soul. Anyway, for some reason, maybe it's pheromones. For all I know, I'm hopelessly in love with Gail. Pathetic, really, especially considering I'm married to Evelyn, who probably more than 50% of guys would find hotter than Gail. In addition, Evelyn is sweet, kind to everyone, and smart and outgoing. We never quarrel and have a relationship of mutual respect. In order for my story to make sense, I need to talk about my history with Evelyn, as well as her relationship with Bryce. Evelyn came from a poor family and was only able to attend college thanks to a full scholarship. However, even this did not cover all expenses not included in the cost of living and training. At the beginning of my first year of college, I posted an ad for my business in the student center, and she was one of the first to apply. Evelyn is really pretty and outgoing, although she lacked self-confidence at the time. It was obvious that she needed to be hired. She was an excellent worker, working 10 to 15 hours a week. I paid well enough that she had enough money for personal expenses, although still not enough to go home for the holidays. I don't know exactly how Bryce got into our college. I know his grades and test scores probably weren't up to par, but he had family in his alumni and is very outgoing, which probably helped him make a good impression in interviews, so maybe that helped. In any case, he was hard-working enough to barely stay afloat. Bryce met Evelyn through me at the beginning of our sophomore year. They seemed to hit it off and started dating soon after they met. By the start of their 3rd year, they seemed inseparable and were heading toward marriage after college. Then, towards the end of the 3rd year, they separated. At the time, I didn't know exactly why they broke up. Bryce and Evelyn changed their stories several times. The story I ended up believing was that since Bryce was on academic probation, Evelyn was afraid he would flunk out, or if he didn't flunk out, he'd never make it in business, and given her background involved with poverty, she sought to avoid this. While I believe Evelyn made the decision to break up, that didn't mean she didn't take it hard. She was a good friend of mine, not just an employee, and I gave her a man's shoulder to cry on. Listening to her troubles, I was especially touched by the fact that her parents were evicted from their apartment, and she had nowhere to go for the summer, and the job she was counting on in her hometown fell through. I became her knight on a white horse. Evelyn, I'm growing my business a lot this summer, and I need a full-time employee. Why don't you work for me all summer? Evelyn was not as surprised by my proposal as I might have thought, which led me to believe that she was hoping that I would ask her. After a pause, she said, "But I don't have a place to stay." "Let me call my parents," I said. "They have a big house, and my twin brothers are graduating from college, and at least one of them has already found a job in another city, so we'll have room." "Are you serious?" she asked, almost with tears in her eyes. "Let me find out. I don't promise anything, but I don't see any reason why not." "You don't expect me to, be ashamed to ask, to sleep with you, right?" she asked stammeringly. I chuckled. "My parents are overly religious and strict, and although I do not share their views on life, I can assure you that the likelihood of us sleeping together in their house is zero. That evening, I called my mother, asked her to get my father on the phone, told Evelyn about the situation, and once I assured them that we were not in a romantic or sexual relationship, they agreed. I always wanted a girl to be around to discuss girlish issues, was my mother's last remark. Evelyn was an excellent worker, so good that I paid her twice as much as the other 3 summer workers. Her high salary was also because I knew that she really needed money for her studies, and she sent some of it to her still homeless parents. My mother loved having Evelyn around and often took her shopping, so that by the start of the school year, her wardrobe was 10 times better and more extensive than before. At first, Evelyn was embarrassed by my mother's generosity, but when I pointed out to her how much it pleased my mother and that my parents could easily afford it, she humbly accepted the clothes. I dated a lot at school, but I didn't have a regular girlfriend. At home during the summer, I went on a few dates, but since I felt bad leaving Evelyn at home since she didn't know anyone in my hometown and didn't have transportation, I usually took her with me on outings and parties. Because of her attractiveness and kindness, she was often approached, but she politely and almost respectfully refused everyone. Evelyn and I really liked each other, but despite being together all summer, there was no romantic spark. After the first month, it became obvious to me that my mother would be very happy if we became romantically involved, if not for sex before marriage. Everything changed on the last weekend before the start of the school year. My parents were helping my older twin brother, who lived with us this summer, but now got a job in another state, move. Evelyn and I were alone for the first time Friday night until Sunday. Evelyn had gone to the doctor the previous Wednesday. I lent her his car. She didn't say anything about the reasons for the visit, and I didn't ask. We ordered Chinese food on Friday night, and Evelyn was more insistent than ever that we watch the DVD she bought. I didn't mind because I didn't want to go anywhere. After a walk around the neighborhood to digest, we sat in my parents' home theater, and Evelyn put in a DVD and sat next to me, resting her head on my shoulder even though we were sitting in theater seats. I didn't recognize the movie until about 20 minutes had passed, and it turned out to be a bland film for adults. I gulped as the first steamy sex scene began, and I began to have an unwanted reaction. Even though the room was quite dark, Evelyn noticed it. How did I know she noticed? Because she ran her hand down my pants. As I looked at Evelyn with an expression that was probably somewhere between surprise, bewilderment, and lust, she kissed me tenderly on the lips and, looking into my eyes, said, "You'll never make the first move, so I will." With these words, she stood up and began to undress to the music from the film. When she was completely naked, she pulled me to my feet. Her premeditation, if I had any doubts, was confirmed when she suddenly took 2 training mats from the second row of seats and placed them on the floor, then placed my hands on her chest and began to kiss me passionately. As I already said, Evelyn is a very attractive woman, both in appearance and in character, so I quickly took off my clothes. Soon we were lying on the mats, caressing each other. A few minutes later, we were having sex. Our first sex was sweet, really, really sweet. When we returned to school, we were already a couple. Evelyn had to live in the dorms for her first semester as it was necessary for her room and board, although she spent many nights in my off-campus apartment. After the first semester, she somehow managed to replace the dorm room and board with a cash payment, and she moved in with me. Since I had always been honest with my parents, even though I was already financially independent of them, I called them the first weekend Evelyn moved in with me. If she hadn't lived with my parents last summer, there would probably have been tears, accusations, gnashing of teeth, and some form of retaliation. But since Evelyn really liked my dad and my mom had gotten close to her, there were virtually no fights. My mother's only concern was, "I hope you do the right thing and marry her, Kyle." By then, I was thinking the same thing. Evelyn and I got married 2 months after graduation. Following my instructions, my parents made the wedding as simple as possible for my mother. After we got engaged halfway through our senior year, my father got Evelyn's parents jobs and a rent-controlled apartment for them, and my parents paid for their trip to the wedding and decent clothes. They were very happy that their little girl, their only child, had escaped poverty. Bryce was one of the bridesmaids at our wedding. He and Evelyn were still friendly, and Bryce never resented her being with me. Obviously, after our engagement, Evelyn no longer worked for me, but after her honeymoon, she took a job that matched the skills she learned from me, and given her intelligence and outgoing personality, she was sure to do well. I started a new company, selling my college one for 6 figures, and I was definitely going to be successful too. Evelyn and I had enough money from my previous companies to buy a decent house shortly before we got married. Bryce rented an apartment in the same metropolis, about 3 miles from our house. Bryce met Gail about a year after we got married. I don't even know how they met, but Gail was a year older than Bryce and she had a decent job in sales, which I believe she was very good at. They seemed to really like each other and got married about 6 months after they met. Evelyn and I were both at the wedding party as Gail and Evelyn also seemed to really like each other. Getting back to my story after this history lesson, I was 28 years old and had been married for 6 years when I was sitting in my office looking at the prospectus of a company that was on the market for sale when my secretary Cher called. "Bryce Finley wants to see you," her voice said. I knew Bryce didn't have an appointment, but since he was an old friend and the prospect could wait, I told her, "Let him through, Cher." Bryce walked in with a big smile on his face. "I hope I didn't disturb you, but I've been wanting to see you for a long time, and driving by, I decided to stop by." "No problem," I smiled, shaking his hand. We chatted for a bit, and then Bryce sighed and said, "The reason I'm here is because I need a loan. My business is really starting to develop, but I have a liquidity crisis. If I can borrow $45,000 for a year, I know I can get past that milestone." $45,000 wasn't a lot of money to me, but losing my friendship with Bryce and possibly not being able to see Gail again would be a loss. Lending money to friends, especially someone like Bryce, who already had 2 failed businesses, was the surest way to lose a friendship. I tried to gently refuse Bryce, including telling him the universal truth that borrowing money leads to loss of friendship, but he was persistent, and I actually saw tears begin to form in his eyes. Finally, I gave in and said, "Okay, give me your latest financial report and a 1-page note about what the money will be used for and how it will make a difference, and I'll take a closer look at it." "Can I email all of this today?" he asked. I really want to get the loan by Monday of next week." "Of course," I smiled. We shook hands and he left. I received his email within 90 minutes. I looked at him and, as expected, he didn't know what he was doing. I wondered how he could have a business degree and still be so inexperienced. I had a lot to think about, so I called him and told him I would give him an answer by Monday, and if I agreed, I would send a check by courier. On Saturday, Evelyn and I went to a pool party that our friends were throwing at their mini mansion in a remote suburb. By the time we drove there, I was sure I would turn Bryce down. I just didn't know how to soften the blow. Imagine my surprise when we arrived at the party and Gail was there. It turned out that she went to college with our owner, Sherry Jepson. Although Gail is far from curvy, when I saw her in a swimsuit, my pants immediately tightened, and I was especially struck by her perfect hips and butt. I was extremely embarrassed by my instinctive reaction, especially because I could not properly appreciate why it always affected me the way it did. After I pulled myself together, I saw that Gail had ended the conversation and approached her as friendly as possible. Usually, I was almost speechless around her, but for some reason I wasn't that day. "Hi, Gail," was my distinguished greeting, followed by a hug that I tried to make as innocuous as possible. "Hey, Kyle," she seemed to actually smile, returning my hug much less carefully than I had given it to her. "Where is Evelyn?" "Evelyn is talking to Sherry Jepson. I'm sure she'll be there soon." "Is Bryce here?" I answered. "No," she frowned. "He's trying to put out fires at work this weekend. I'm a little worried about him. He's been under a lot of stress about his business lately, including talk that we might have to move out of our rental condo. But today, no troubles, let's have fun. Why don't you put on your bathing suit and we can go for a swim in the Jepson's pool. I've always heard good things about semi-salt Olympic infinity pools and have never seen one like this, and since no one else is swimming yet, we can baptize him. You can be sure that I changed my clothes in 60 seconds, and we dived into the water together. We swam lazily for 6 laps, chatting as we did, and then she challenged me to a competition. I probably wouldn't have won against her anyway since my muscles are designed for lifting weights and running, not swimming, but I slowed down a little at the end for her to win so I could compliment her without feeling like too much of a pervert. I spent more one-on-one time with Gail at the party than I had ever had in my life up to that point. It was probably, considering when we were in small groups, more than 2 hours of time together. I didn't ignore Evelyn, and she seemed to be having a great time without my constant attention. Gail arrived with someone who wanted to leave early, but I asked her to wait while I talked to Evelyn. In the sweetest way, I asked Evelyn if we could take Gail home, and she happily agreed. This gave me even more time with Gail during the 50-minute drive to her condo. Gail, who was sitting in the back, and Evelyn had a great conversation during the ride, and, as always when they were together, seemed to get along great. I had to keep checking my rearview mirror. I didn't want some spy car following us until I noticed I was getting horny again, so I had to look straight ahead. After spending a significant portion of the day with Gail, when I brought Evelyn home, there was no way she could escape passion. As soon as she came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, I stood there naked and with an evil smile on my face. "What are you looking at like that, pervert?" Evelyn asked with a slight smile on her face. "I'm looking at the one I wanted to make love with all day, but couldn't in polite company. You looked so hot in your bikini that I almost had sex with you on the pool deck," I growled, maintaining my devilish smile. "I thought you were looking at Gail Finley," she said in a tone that was difficult to decipher. Perhaps she was serious, or perhaps provocative. I did not care. "In an hour, you'll tell me who I wanted in the Jepson's pool, bitch," I growled again, walking up to her and ripping off her towel. Evelyn screamed. I picked it up and threw it over my shoulder like a caveman. She tapped my back, saying, "Let me go, you animal." I threw her on the bed, and we had sex. I might feel both embarrassed and guilty for thinking about Gail while having sex with Evelyn. Gail wasn't done playing with my mind yet. I woke up from a dream about sex with Gail excitedly, hugging Evelyn. We had sex again. The next morning, Evelyn was all smiles. If yesterday she was annoyed by something because of my attention to Gail, yesterday's sex completely erased it. Not only did she not know that her euphoria was due to my thoughts about Gail, on Sunday I started to feel remorse. I realized that although my relationship with Evelyn was based on sympathy, respect, and deep admiration, and although we both enjoyed our sexual relationship, passion was absent. The passion of Saturday night and early Sunday morning was caused entirely by my fantasies about Gail. This really, really bothered me. After my interactions with Gail on Saturday, I stopped seeing Bryce's loan as a business transaction. I felt that even if I ended up just giving him $45,000, since Gail would somehow benefit from it, I wouldn't care. Bryce was very pleased when I delivered him a check for $45,000 on Monday morning, along with a very simple loan agreement at an interest rate 2 points below base and payable at his discretion, but with all $45,000 and interest due within 18 months. I also provided him with some advice on how he could improve his situation. He quickly signed the contract, faxed it to me, and expressed his deep gratitude over the phone. "I won't let you down," he said solemnly, although he made no mention of my advice. Over the next 12 months, many things happened. In no particular order of time or importance they were. I started seeing Gail more often, both with and without Bryce, since she started working in the building next to mine, and we would sometimes have lunch together or just go for a short walk during lunch if the weather was nice. I kept trying to figure out why I was so infatuated with Gail. I never found out, but unfortunately my admiration for her seemed to increase as I got to know her, rather than decrease as I had hoped. When I've had crushes in the past, they'll go away within 6 months. Unfortunately, it was not just a hobby, it was something much more serious and disturbing. I realized that although I love Evelyn more than anyone else on earth, I do not feel passionate love for her. When I'm around Gail, all my nerve endings pulsate. When I'm around Evelyn, I'm calm. Making love with Evelyn was extremely enjoyable. When I fantasized that it was Gail, when I had sex with Evelyn, it was not just pleasant, it was passionate, furious, bestial. Bryce's business is in even more trouble. Gail often complained about how hopeless his situation was. Of course, he never implemented the tips I suggested that would have at least mitigated his problems. Evelyn also seemed concerned about Bryce's situation. Evelyn is a very empathetic person, and when we met with Bryce and Gail, she tried to calm him down. Then things started to get out of control. After calling to make sure Evelyn would not be home, he came to my house on Saturday. He was desperate again. "Kyle, I know you've already been more than generous to me, but I have nowhere else to go, so I'm turning to you for help again. If I don't get another $20,000 quickly, not only will I lose my business, but there are some shady investors who will be really unhappy, and I'm worried for my and Gail's safety." And Gail's safety caught my attention. I questioned Bryce thoroughly over the next half hour and found out that his situation was real. I then asked him why he did not implement my suggestions. I wanted to get out of my situation using my mind without the help of anyone else. Now I realize how stupid it was. I still wasn't inclined to give him more money since it would just go down the drain, and the only thing keeping me from just kicking him out was my concern for Gail. I think what he said next was in complete despair. "Listen, Kyle, I know that you are passionate about Gail, everyone can see it. Sometimes she lets me blindfold her and tie her hands to the head of the bed. I can do this, and then you can go into the bedroom and take it. This will be your payment for the money." My initial reactions included disgust, surprise, embarrassment, and humiliation. I reprimanded him, but he didn't back down. "You know you want to have sex with her. Here's your chance. She'll never know, and I'll never tell anyone, including Evelyn. Man, I'm desperate. Please, you have to help me," Bryce begged, almost with tears in his eyes. I must have been in a trance or an alternate reality, because the next thing I knew, I was writing him a check for $20,000, and he was telling me that the next night around 8 o'clock, I could sneak into his condominium. After he left, I was emotionally exhausted. I was like an automaton as I cooked myself dinner, talked to Evelyn on the phone, trying to hide my inner turmoil, watched a movie without noticing it, and then fell into an uneasy sleep. Bryce called me at 7:30 the next night. "All is ready. Come at 8 as planned." I couldn't believe I was actually going to do this, but I made it to Bryce's condominium, arriving 5 minutes before 8 and, as we had agreed, sneaked through the unlocked back door. I walked upstairs slowly and heard Bryce in the master bedroom. Apparently he and Gail were playing some kind of game. I heard Bryce say, "You've been a bad girl, so I'm giving you to someone else today, Candy." Apparently that was Gail's sexy name. "Don't, Dalton, please," she fake begged Bryce. "I'll be good and won't have your friends anymore." They continued their remarks while I made my way into the room. When I saw Gail naked, blindfolded, and with her hands chained to the headboard of the bed, I became horny. I automatically began to unbuckle my belt while Bryce encouraged me to play. Suddenly, it dawned on me. I buckled my belt, turned, and literally ran out of the house. That I had come so close to breaking my wedding vows, taking a woman who was my friend, and inviting the scorn of my wife, parents, and everyone who knew me, stunned me. I threw up in the bushes in front of Bryce and Gail's condo, somehow made it home without getting into an accident, and collapsed in the guest bedroom, curled up in the fetal position, and literally crying myself to sleep. Still racked with guilt, I called my secretary Cher on Monday morning and told her I wouldn't be coming and that she would reschedule my appointments for Monday. While I was drinking a cup of tea around 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Seeing that it was Gail, I almost didn't open the door, but I decided that even if I'm a pervert, I'm not a coward, so I opened the door. Without smiling, Gail walked in and said the famous words, "We need to talk." "Should I pour you something?" I asked timidly. Gail was already sitting in my living room when she replied, "I'm here to hit. Slap your ass instead of drinking a mint julep, so sit down." I sighed and did as I was told. What the hell were you doing in my room last night when I was naked and starting to unzip my pants? Were you going to have sex with me? I, I thought that you, were, blindfolded, I stammered, looking anywhere but at her. "Look at me, you idiot," she said sharply. As I continued to look down, she stood up, walked towards me, and slapped me in the face. I said, "Look at me." Despite the pain in my cheek, I raised my eyes and looked at her. Her emerald green eyes literally pierced my soul. "Bryce is a goofball. The blindfold was not tight and partially transparent. I saw you there. As soon as you ran away, I forced Bryce to release me, and then I gave him a dressing down. He kept claiming that he didn't know you were coming, but obviously he was lying, because even a pervert like you wouldn't enter the house without an invitation. And it's clear that you came through an unlocked door," she said furiously. I lowered my eyes to the floor again. Gail grabbed my hair and lifted my face so I was looking at her. "Tell me what the hell is going on." "Okay," I said. "Sit down and I'll tell you everything." I decided that the time for lying had passed. "I'm hopelessly infatuated with you. I hate myself for this. I hate that the most passionate moments of my love with Evelyn happen when I fantasize about you. I don't even have the slightest idea why you bewitched me. I thought I had successfully hidden my crush, but apparently even Bryce, who is definitely not the most observant person in the world, noticed, so I'm sure Evelyn noticed too, and it hurt her." I tried to gauge Gail's reaction, but her face remained blank, so I went ahead and told her all about my contacts with Bryce, how I had helped him with $45,000 that I was sure I would never get back, his plea for an extra $20,000 or he feared for his and yours, security, and about his idea to get me to agree by fucking you without you knowing it's me. By the time I finished speaking, Gail's face was full of emotions. I just couldn't pinpoint which ones. After a pause, she asked, "So why didn't you fuck me?" "Because it wouldn't be your choice, and you definitely don't deserve it. Because I would cheat on Evelyn, and because I could never meet you, my parents, or Evelyn again," I replied. There was the most awkward silence of my life that lasted what felt like hours, but was probably only a couple of minutes as Gail looked at me, and I occasionally met her gaze, and then looked at the floor again. Finally, she stood up, walked over to me, lifted my chin, and kissed me passionately on the lips. When she let go, she said, "You're so damn naive and inexperienced that I doubt you can be saved. I'll contact you after I meet Evelyn tomorrow. She and I are having dinner tomorrow night, so make other plans." Gail then turned and walked out of the house, swaying her hips. I don't know if my Y chromosome makes me naive or stupid, or if it's something in my upbringing or education. All I knew was that I had no idea what was going on. Last night's near disaster and Gail's visit had so agitated my mind that I didn't know what to do, if anything to do at all. On Monday, I was essentially a zombie. I think I was reading some documents for work, but didn't remember the information in them, and was watching some mindless TV, but was not alive when Evelyn returned home around 6:30 p.m. Evelyn greeted me with a kiss as if nothing had happened, even though I knew she was talking to Gail. To what extent the information had been conveyed, I didn't know, and then asked, "Have you eaten yet?" "No, I was waiting for you," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "Great. Let's go to our favorite restaurant nearby, Luigi's," she smiled. "I wouldn't mind having eggplant parmesan." That's what we did. During dinner, we kept the conversation light. I heard news about her parents. Luckily, it was good news as my dad got them a job and a rent-regulated apartment. She told me about interesting things at work and grilled me a little about some of my projects at work. She surprised me by asking about my loans to Bryce, since I didn't remember ever telling her about it, was curious why he didn't follow my suggestions, and wondered if there was a chance I would ever pay the money back. I told her that I was unlikely to return it. On the way back, she mentioned that she was having dinner with Gail tomorrow. When we got home, she turned on the music and insisted that I dance with her, We'd been taking a few dance lessons, and she wanted to practice, and then she led me upstairs to the bedroom. Evelyn initiated the shower together, and I only got my hands slapped 6 times, a record for me in shared showers, and then she tenderly made love to me in our bed and fell asleep on my shoulder. Her last words before she fell asleep kept me awake all night. No matter what happens, I'm so glad we were married. It was the joy of my life. Despite almost no sleep, I went to work on Tuesday morning. I was surprised that I was actually able to get quite a lot of work done. I ate at a local delicatessen around 6:00 p.m. since I knew Evelyn wouldn't be home and got home around 7:15. I was exhausted and fell into a deep sleep by 7:45, barely able to take a quick shower before passing out in bed. Evelyn was next to me when I woke up the next morning. She also woke up and kissed me tenderly on the lips. At breakfast, I asked her about her dinner with Gail. She will come to our place on Thursday at 6:00 p.m. to eat Chinese food and talk to us. Make sure you get off work on time. Um, about what? About what? I asked, stammering. You'll see, Evelyn replied with a smile. On Wednesday evening, Evelyn and I had a very cozy and pleasant evening. I was able to get a good night's sleep and not have to worry about Gail's visit. I decided to look at it like a visit to the dentist. If you think about it 24 hours before your appointment, you will suffer for 24 hours. If you don't think about it in advance, you'll only suffer for those 10 minutes while the dentist drills. I found it odd that when Gail arrived on Thursday evening, she had a small suitcase with her when I opened the door. I asked her about it, and she said something like, "I brought something for Evelyn," before changing the subject. We ate Chinese food while chatting. I think I managed to avoid looking at Gail's eyes, hips, or ass. After that, as soon as we cleared the table, everyone went into the living room with a glass of wine. As soon as we sat down, a serious conversation began. Gail spoke first. "Kyle, you are probably the savviest businessman I have ever met. Everything you touch turns to gold. However, you have blinders on when it comes to personal relationships. Like, did you really think you were hiding your crush on me for the last 2 years? You think you love Evelyn, and you have no idea that Evelyn and Bryce have always had a connection since college, and although they never had sex after their 3rd year of college, they always had feelings for each other." I couldn't say a word, but I probably opened and closed my mouth several times, like a fish just out of water. Gail hesitated briefly, then continued. "According to your hazy perception of interpersonal relationships, you probably do not understand that I am as fascinated by you as you are by me. I will hand it over to Evelyn before I propose my plan." Evelyn stood up and sat next to me, taking my hand. "Kyle, you are my best friend. I love you and you love me, but not like Romeo and Juliet. We love each other as friends. You have every desirable quality in a man, and I know you think I have every desirable quality in a woman. However, we don't have passion except when you think about Gail during sex." But, I began to stutter before Evelyn interrupted my torment. "Kyle, when we were having our most intense sexual experiences in the last 2 years, and I was really enjoying them, you were screaming Gail's name half the time at one point. I'm not sure you ever knew exactly why I broke up with Bryce in college. It wasn't because I didn't feel passionate love for him. It was because I didn't believe he would ever succeed, and he didn't, and given my background in poverty, I couldn't afford to let it happen again. In you, I found a man who was handsome, courageous, and honest, and who was destined to succeed. Heck, you graduated from college with about $200,000 in your bank account. You had it all, and I loved you for it, even though I didn't have the passion for you that I had for Bryce." I think I turned back into a mute fish, opening and closing my mouth before Evelyn continued. "Bryce needs me, you don't need it. You want Gail, and you have to have her. With the money I made and a few fair settlements in the event of our divorce, I could save Bryce without putting myself at risk of falling back into poverty, so I enthusiastically support Gail's proposal." With that, Gail stood up, walked over to me, sat on her knees, and put her arms around my neck. Evelyn and I decided to exchange for 60 days. At the end of this time, you, Evelyn and Bryce, will meet to decide if we want to make this exchange permanent. If we want, then so be it. If not, then we will probably return to the current state of affairs. Either way, that's exactly how it's going to happen. Evelyn was still holding my hand. She squeezed it and said, "We apologize that this is a fait accompli and that you had no choice. But given your loyalty and honesty, you probably wouldn't agree, so we didn't give you a choice. See you in 60 days. With these words, Evelyn stood up, took out a suitcase from behind the sofa, which I had not noticed, quickly kissed me on the top of my head, and headed towards the door. Her parting words, spoken in a sing-song voice, were, "Don't wear him out too much, Gail." As soon as the door closed, Gail looked me in the eye and said, "First, I really want to know how sexually compatible we are. Do you think you, big and strong, can carry little me into your bedroom?" Evelyn promised she would change the sheets. So, I was completely manipulated by two women who were treated like some pathetic creature who didn't understand the world around me, and they expected me to follow their commands like a circus animal. I seemed to be walking up the stairs 2 steps at a time, even though one of my eyes was closed and my tongue was trying to tickle Gail's tonsils. I'm not entirely sure how I made it to the master bedroom of the house, but I did. The next morning, when we woke up and immediately reported to work that we were sick, I noticed that 2 of Gail's clothes were torn and one of mine was badly damaged. Sex with the real Gail, not just fantasizing about her, was magical. My mind felt like a river of endorphins all weekend, and even if I didn't have a big cat smile on my face the whole time, I had one in my soul. Thus began my sincere relationship with Gail Finley, née Preston. Over the next 60 days, my relationship with Gail was completely different from that with Evelyn. Although Evelyn and I never quarreled, Gail and I did, although we quarreled fairly, and the reconciliation was so fantastic that I almost thought about starting a quarrel every 2 days. We didn't miss a single night without sex. Besides, the feeling in my soul was different every time I saw Gail. It was like an electric current running through my body. With Evelyn, I was infinitely calm. With Gail, I was constantly horny. Around the 50th day of our intelligent exchange, my little brain activity finally caught up with my heart. I realized that I loved Evelyn as a friend. She had all the desirable qualities of a friend, and since she was also beautiful, I confused my respect for her with love. Gail was unpredictable. Sometimes it created inconvenience and had sharp edges. However, this did not distract me from my true feelings for her. I am hopelessly in love with her, not as a friend, but as a lover, an object of desire, and an imperfect person. On the 53rd day of our exchange, when I woke up with the hope that in 7 days all 4 would want to make the exchange permanent, I noticed that Gail was not in bed next to me. I got up and went to look for her. She found herself in the bathroom, making a sacrifice to the porcelain god. "What's the matter with you, darling?" I asked worriedly. She looked at me with a determined look. "I was told that I couldn't get pregnant, and I was going to talk to you about it tomorrow, wondering if you would want to make the exchange permanent, given that fact," she replied, and then leaned over the toilet again. After she finished her sacrifices, we took a shower together. She looked into my eyes as the warm water poured over us. "So what if I'm pregnant? Are you going to give me back to Bryce?" "Hell no," I laughed. "I will worship you even more. Besides, I always wanted to have sex with a pregnant woman, and now I will have this opportunity." On the 61st day of the exchange, Bryce and Evelyn came to us. We chatted for a bit before Evelyn said, "Okay, citizens, it's time to get down to business. Bryce and I talked before we came, and we think it's best to make the exchange permanent. However, to make this happen, we need you, Kyle, to take over his business and make it profitable, after which we can divorce." Gail smiled, walked over to me, sat on my lap, and said, "We're glad you and Bryce are happy because we have a situation. Remember when they told me I couldn't get pregnant? Well, this beast," she interrupted her words with a 5-second kiss, "has proven that this is complete nonsense. I probably got pregnant the first night we were alone, according to my gynecologist." Anyway, we're expecting a baby in about 7 months, and we want it to be legal. We all hugged together, shed tears, and raised a toast to future successes, Gale with grape juice. Since all parties were highly motivated, we quickly got down to business. By Monday of the following week, the lawyers we hired together had filed divorce papers for both couples. By Friday of that week, I had paid off Bryce's troubled investors and taken over his business, and he got a full-time job at the insurance company. Evelyn and I quickly agreed on the division of property. I made sure she never had to worry about poverty and promised her that in the unlikely event that she got into trouble in the future, I would bail her out, because I still love her, even if it was a different love than the one I feel for Gale. With the full cooperation of all four parties, the divorces proceeded in record time, and as soon as they were finalized, Gale and I were married, with Bryce as best man and Evelyn as bridesmaid. We switched places a month later when Bryce and Evelyn got married. I made Bryce's business profitable within 6 months and sold it for a profit within a year. It's been 10 years since Gale and I first slept together. We have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, who have become the loves of our lives. Gale is still unpredictable, but my love for her grows every day, and even someone as naive as me can see that her love for me is the same. We have the best life imaginable. We see Bryce and Evelyn at least once every 2 weeks, if not every week. They are doing well financially since Evelyn is successful and Bryce works for a large company and does not have to make difficult financial decisions. They decided not to have children, but they are a great surrogate aunt and uncle for our children. I still love Evelyn as a friend. She and my mother are still connected, and my mother treats her like a daughter. Every time I see Gale, electricity runs down my spine. She and my mother get along great, and my mother thinks Gale is a wonderful mother. It doesn't matter that she is not a daughter, but a daughter-in-law. Bryce and I are as close now as we were in college, now that his troubles with failed businesses are a thing of the past. It's really strange how things turn out when you make a smart trade. The story is told from the perspective of Kyle Worth, a successful businessman. In high school and college, he was close friends with Bryce Finley, but their destinies were different. Kyle achieved success, and Bryce faced financial difficulties.